Moving on now, we have new developments to report to you in the ongoing peace process between the Colombian government and the FARC rebels, as the guerrillas have announced plans to reenact their unilateral ceasefire. So for more on what is really an important development, we go live to our correspondent Natalia Margarita in Bogota. Natalia, you know, only a few months ago the FARC was under a unilateral ceasefire, but then we saw those tensions escalate. There were attacks, there were accusations from both sides, there were deaths. And so what has led to this really reenactment of that unilateral ceasefire by the FARC? What were the forces behind that?
Well, for sure it was this escalation and intensification of the armed conflict during the last month and a half. And these have put lots of tension into the peace negotiations. So that on the one side. On the other side, of course, this is a gesture of the good willingness and the commitment that the FARC has several times expressed to this peace process. Just yesterday, the peace delegation in Havana said once again, I'm talking about the peace delegation of the FARC, they said once again that they are absolutely committed to bring to an end more than 5 decades of armed conflict through a political negotiation. That is actually what they are doing there in Havana. So this latest decision of reenact this unilateral ceasefire responds to that good willingness and commitment to the peace process, as many peace advocates and political leaders that we have been speaking to during the course of this morning said.
But the key word here, Natalia, is unilateral. So the FARC has agreed to stop any of their aggressions, but the FARC has long called for bilateral, meaning that the government would also agree to stop its attacks. So far, the government has refused to do that, but we have heard some of the negotiators hinting that it might be possible. Do we have any information on whether the government will actually, could possibly agree to a bilateral ceasefire?
Very important to say is that not just the FARC, but social movements here, residents of the rural areas where the conflict, where they experience the conflict the most, they are the ones who have been insisting on a bilateral ceasefire. Also the FARC, of course. And yes, as you said, the government so far has rejected this proposal. And this is a very important element about what happened today, because most of the analysts, I insist, and social movements that we have been speaking to, they have welcomed, again, the unilateral ceasefire by the FARC, but they have called on the government to reciprocate this gesture. Because we already saw during the last unilateral ceasefire that lasts for 5 months, that it is really unsustainable, a unilateral ceasefire, that it is really unsustainable that the FARC just take the fact of the army constantly trying to besiege them. And I believe this is not just something particular of Colombia, but in any other conflict worldwide, you will see that it's very difficult to keep for a long time a unilateral ceasefire. So basically the call today from social organizations and peace advocates, it's a call on the government to finally reciprocate this unilateral ceasefire so that at the end of the day, we can have a bilateral and definitive cessation.
Natalia, I think that just makes sense that it's hard to sustain a unilateral ceasefire quickly. Could you give us an update on the peace talks?
Well, currently we continue in the 38th round of peace negotiations with a very much complex and challenging point being discussed right there in Havana, which is the point of victims. And the reason why it is really complicated is because the point of victims establishes that in this moment we need to address also the issue of transitional justice, which has to do with the right to truth from the victims, and also the issue of sanctions. So it's being pretty much challenging for both sides, both parties involved in the negotiations. We hope, and social organizations here in Colombia hope, that in the following week that it's scheduled to end this 38th round of negotiations, we finally are going to have an agreement on that point that so far has been discussed for almost a year.
All right, Natalia.
Also important.
Go
Also
ahead.
important, sorry, Cody, also important to say is that the negotiation agenda between the FARC and the Colombian government is a negotiation agenda of 5 points. So far they have agreed on 3 points. The issue of victims is the 4th point. So if they really manage to get an agreement during the coming days or next week, then the only thing that is going to be left to discuss is the end of the conflict itself, meaning the technicalities of lay down of weapons by the insurgency. But we're pretty much close to the end, and people here believe that this unilateral ceasefire, it's going to be good in terms of pushing forward the 2 points that are left to be agreed upon.
Well, it certainly looks like a step forward, Natalia. Thanks so much for your ongoing reporting there. Natalia Margarita reporting from Colombia.